HIPAA registration. Today we're going to be talking about three specific topics within HIPAA registration. We're going to be taking a look at the different forms and how we can customize those forms for HIPAA-specific workflows. We're also going to be digging into some of the security and privacy rule aspects of HIPAA and how that applies during the registration process. And then finally, we're going to wrap up by talking about overall workflows, triggers, and processes that can fire based off of kind of interdependencies with patients, doctors, pharmacies, other internal resources, lab results, you name it, e-signature, etc. And just kind of go into how those can be built into the registration process when a user signs up. Okay, let's dive in. So with the HIPAA registration process, one of the most important things is, depending on your business and the workflow that you're following, you may have a very simple registration process. You may have a very complex registration process. So there could be many fields and possibly multiple forms that someone needs to complete before they can even register for the site. In most cases, we want to keep the registration process as simple as possible and allow the user to have additional steps that they can complete in order to get access to more of a complete experience. This tends to make the overall conversion process go much better. And so in general, we're only going to want to include steps that are necessary. So here you can see in this example of a registration form, the user puts in basic information, and in most cases, that may be enough to allow them to register. Then we may want to include some of these detailed kind of PHI aspects in the actual checkout form for certain products or on the product details for certain products. This is an option that you can assess. In this particular form, you can see that we're actually going ahead and requiring some of these fields during the checkout process. So here we have PHI information, where we're looking at their insurance, we're looking at some of their demographic details, and we're going to take advantage of using this to make sure that the medication that is prescribed or that they attempt to purchase is actually going to meet their needs. And if there's any kind of guidance that the pharmacist needs to apply, for example, they're going to have the background details that they need to be able to provide that. And then here you can see it's a pretty simple kind of process after they provide their PHI information. Okay, so now let's take a look at another example that's really, really simple. And here you can see this particular user is just providing basic kind of identity verification information. And they're going to use this in order to be able to essentially associate their account or their invoice with their particular user information. Now, this is more of a bill payment portal that you're seeing here, as opposed to a e-commerce process, which is what this registration form is associated to. So this is more of a kind of checkout and e-commerce for an online pharmacy type of experience. This is more of a patient bill pay portal where they're using some of their PHI information to look up their invoice so they can make a payment. Similarly, you can see that in that registration process, the user can also input their email, and then they can complete their registration by creating a username and password so that they can get back to their account if they want. So this whole process is really focusing around a very streamlined experience for the user, whereas this one is just doing everything up front. We're basically getting all the information up front. So you can kind of think about this as, how do I want the form complexity to kind of impact my user experience? In some cases, it's better to just go for it and get all the information up front. But in most cases, you're going to want to remove any friction from the registration process that you can. Okay, so now let's take a look at another registration. In this particular registration, you can see that the user is being notified about the privacy. They're also getting information about whether or not their username is already taken. And they go ahead and create their password information, provide email, phone, fax, all of that. But then they're also providing information that is PHI. So this, in this case, is going to be looking at their pharmacy, their insurance company, and their prescription copay amount. And again, for this particular case, this is an online pharmacy. Now, an interesting thing about this registration process as well is this one is also requesting that they verify their age, that they're at least older than a certain age. but they're not putting their date of birth in, but they are also providing their location. And by providing their location, they're going to be kind of giving us information we need on the back end to determine whether or not we apply certain logic to what shows up and what doesn't. So this is really helpful for the user so that they can kind of automatically get the information that shows in their catalog view and the categories and the products that show up based on the jurisdiction they're in. For certain states, for certain regions, for certain countries, of course, there are different rules and regulations for what we can sell online and what the process is that someone has to go through in order to get those items online. And so this is really important when you're dealing with HIPAA so that we can make sure that, both the storefront experience and any kind of in-person or over the phone experience, that they're really kind of constant with regards to compliance. You want to make sure that everything in your process is compliant. Now, finally, this is another really interesting registration process. For this process that you'll see here, this is for a device that is gathering glucose information. And this platform itself, this portal platform, is capable of handling multiple different devices of different types so that the user can bring in additional information for maybe they're doing blood pressure monitoring. Maybe there's some other monitoring that they want to do, heart rate monitoring. You name it, any device that we can get data from, we can pull it into this portal. And then you also have healthcare professionals who can tie into this portal as well. So this is pretty interesting. So the user can choose what kind of user they are. Based on the user they select that they are, they get a registration kind of form that they complete. And then in this particular form, you can see that they're selecting PHI information that they're providing. In particular, for this glucose monitor, it's the diabetes type and then their date of birth. And then we're also getting their location as well. And then finally, their registration is complete. So this registration is more of a external device that we're connecting into a portal system. And this could be a really nice opportunity for upselling for this particular device provider if they have physical items that need to be replenished or auto shipped out. This is a great way to provide that through this complementary portal that goes with their device and allows them possibly to experience different kind of educational aspects, etc. Now, we'll actually go into this in more detail in some of the other videos where you can see how the device sharing and etc. Occurs, and we'll also go into the pairing process with that device. But the main takeaway here is that with the registration process, there are a lot of different details that we can take advantage of. And next, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about privacy and security. Whenever you're dealing with registration, typically you're going to be at least considering whether or not you're going to bring in PHI information. Now, PHI with HIPAA is really kind of the crux of what makes HIPAA something that you have to comply with or not. Are you gathering information? Are you sharing information that is PHI? And kind of fundamentally, the security and the privacy aspects of HIPAA really heavily apply to the online space, whether it's a publicly available set of endpoints, a public application, multiple public options for people to get access. Maybe they have to log in, but they could get access if the system were breached. This really presents a kind of a footprint that you're going to want to assess kind of what the risk is that you're violating HIPAA and constantly be proactive about making sure that you're not doing that. So without going into a lot of detail on the security rule and the privacy rule, the bottom line is there are nuanced details that apply. And during the registration process, this is kind of one of the key areas where we're gathering some of this information potentially. So we really encourage you to work with an expert who understands what the security rule, the privacy rule, and really all of the nuances of these kind of HIPAA regulations are. And of course, it doesn't just apply to HIPAA. There are just best practices when you're dealing with somebody's personal information that make a lot of sense. Do we actually need the information? How are we encrypting the data? How are we telling the user what we're going to do with the information? How are we allowing the user to access and see what we're using it for? And how are we logging it? How are we preventing other users in our internal back office from accessing information they shouldn't have access to. And the list goes on, but the bottom line is these are key aspects that we encourage you to look into with our particular e-commerce platform and with our portal capabilities. This is a constant requirement for our team during our discovery and during our implementation phase of our projects and our ongoing support. We're constantly looking at this and working to make sure that your footprint is as small as possible for any risk, and just that we're respectful and mindful about the security, privacy rule, and HIPAA overall, as well as the credibility of your company and your team when we're interacting with this sensitive data. Okay, so now let's take a look at some of the workflows and some of the detailed triggers that can occur with the registration as well. Okay, so one of the really cool things that we're going to be able to do whenever someone registers or whenever they complete part of the registration process, if this is a multi-part registration process, is we're going to be able to look up the account if they already have an account. For many cases, we work with labs and on-site kind of testing companies or on-site care companies, etc. And for these particular cases, the user may already have an account, but they may not have an online account. So they may need to do some form of lookup that's secure, and there may be a verification process as well. So the internal team or the internal lab system or a pharmacist or a doctor, they may need to grant access once somebody requests to link their account to their internal records that are already there with the company, with your company. Another scenario that can occur is, in this case, with this particular system that we're showing now, this system allows somebody to link their device to an account. So that may also require specific steps. And really the main thing we want you to understand is the registration can be customized from just a very simple form where we're kind of taking in information with different data fields that is pretty common, and even more advanced forms where we can key some of the fields to kind of drive additional questions and create branching logic, etc. That's pretty standard. But we can do a lot more by kind of triggering workflow steps that can include other actors within the process. So this can be a patient first and then a doctor, or a doctor first and then they kind of invite a patient to then take a test. It can really be a myriad of different options. There could be an appointment creation process during the registration. And once the appointment is done, possibly the results from a lab have to be a certain level before the user can then register. I mean, really, the list goes on. So the bottom line here is that we can not only create workflows, but we can also integrate with back office, internal, EMR, EHR, pharmacy, lab result, you name it, Bluetooth device, and also additional people in the workflow. And this is really helpful because a lot of times with this sensitive PHI data, with the really important focus on security and privacy, you really don't want people to access their account or their information unless you know it's them, and unless you know that they actually need access to the system. So we really work to make sure that's possible by providing some of these capabilities with the workflows and with the security that we're building into that process. Okay, so we hope that you've enjoyed the video that we just covered. And ultimately, one of the big takeaways that we want to encourage you to consider is that we do offer a complimentary discovery process and a lot of additional resources that are complementary related to this topic. One of the biggest things about the Clarity software and the overall Clarity process is we really like to build long-term relationships. In fact, we really see this as an opportunity to help even if there isn't a good fit for us to directly work together. We really care about this industry and what's going on in the space, and we encourage you to take advantage of our complementary resources as well as our complementary discovery and strategy sessions that we can offer. If we can help, we certainly encourage you to dig in with us and ask for support as you approach any of your upcoming projects. And with that said, if you would help us as well to get the word out about this valuable service and these valuable resources, we just ask that you hit the like button and subscribe if you're watching this online, and we will look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.